All that we are capable of doing, that's perceiving, thinking, learning, remembering, all these acts are made possible by the integrated activity of the cells of the nervous system. So to understand the nervous system controls, how it controls behavior, we have to understand its moving parts, the cells and what's composed of it. So in this chapter, we're going to be looking at cells of the nervous system. We're going to explain and describe how the communication within the neuron occurs, and then as well as how communication occurs between the neurons as well. So let's begin chapter 2 by talking about the two types of nervous systems. You have the central nervous system, or the CNS, which is essentially your brain and spinal cord. What's important to remember with the CNS is all the nerve fibers are encased in bone, and that could be your spine or your skull for your brain, where your brain is encased. The second type of nervous system is the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. And that consists of the system that's outside the brain and spinal cord, and includes nerves attached to the brain to various parts of your body, including your arms, your legs, and even some of your vital organs. Going outside of your central nervous system, or your CNS, you have three types of neurons. You have your sensory neuron, you have your motor neuron, and you have your inner neuron. The sensory neuron detects changes in external and internal environment and sends that information about these changes to the central nervous system. The motor neuron, which is similar, but it is located within the central nervous system, and it controls the contraction of muscles or the secretion of a gland. Inner neurons, however, they're a little bit different. They lie entirely within the CNS. Local inner neurons form circuits to nearby neurons, and I like to think of the inner neurons as the roads or the paths that really connect everything together, from your PNS to your CNS. These three types of neurons, they relay information between the central and peripheral nervous system. In this example here, you see the person sees a glass of water, and the sensory nerves relay the sensory information toward the CNS. The motor output from the CNS allows that person to lift the glass and take that drink. At a very basic level, we see the neuron as 5 different parts. The soma, or the cell body of the neuron, it contains the nucleus. The dendrite is the branch tree-like structure that you see in this picture, and it's attached to the soma of the neuron. It receives information from the terminal buttons of other neurons. The synapse, or the junction between the terminal button of the axon and the membrane of another neuron. We'll get into what happens in the synapse here in a little bit. The axon, the long, thin, cylindrical structure, conveys the information from the soma of the neuron to its terminal buttons, and it's often covered by the myelin sheath, which we'll discuss a little bit later. Then at the very end, you have the terminal button. This is the bud at the end of the branch of the axon, and this forms a synapse with other neurons. It also sends information to the other neurons as well, and secretes the neurotransmitter, which regulates the ability to transfer information between the synapses. In this slide, it gives us a little bit of a depiction of how the electron signal flows through the neuron. As you can see here, the information is received by the dendrites and then filtered through the soma, pushed through the axon, and then out to the terminal buttons, where it communicates to other neurons. Within the terminal buttons, we have neurotransmitter and exoplasmic transports. Now, the terminal buttons, they have a very special function. And when the action potential is traveling down the axon, reaches them, they secrete a chemical that's called a neurotransmitter. Now, this is a chemical, and there are many different ones within the central nervous system. They either excite or inhibit the reception of cells. and thus it helps to determine whether the action potential occurs or it does not. Now, the exoplasmic transport, on the other hand, is an active process that propels the substance along the microtubular tracts. And this can go both ways. It can either be anterograde, which is movement from the soma to the button, or it could be retrograde, which is movement from the button back to the soma. So within the neuron, we also have supporting cells for the central nervous system. There are many supporting cells, but the three we're going to focus on for this lesson are the glia, or the glial cells. You might hear it referenced elsewhere. They tend to act as the glue for the CNS altogether. The neurons lead a very sheltered existence, but essentially they help to surround the neurons and hold them in place, just like the glue that we described earlier. In addition to the glia, we also have astrocytes, which they get their name because they are star-shaped, which is interesting. And their job is kind of the janitor within the neuron, and they clean up the debris within the brain. Any leftover parts or neurotransmitters, they help to clean that up so that it doesn't interfere with the release of other neurons. Another type of glial cell is the oligodendrocytes, and they also help with the myelin sheath, which insulates the axons from other interference from other neurotransmitters or anything that's going on within other axons. Microglia also is similar to the astrocytes, where they are the cleanup crew. In addition to being the cleanup of leftover neurotransmitters, the microglia help to fight off or ward off any kind of diseases or bacteria that might enter the brain, ultimately protecting us from any kind of neurodamage from viruses. In this slide, we see the difference between the capillary of all the body, except for the brain, and then the capillary in the brain. So in the brain, there's a barrier between the CNS and circulatory system, and this helps regulate the flow of nutrient-rich fluid into the brain area, or the postrema, which is a region of the medulla where the blood-brain barrier is weak. This allows toxins in the blood to stimulate this area, which initiates vomiting. A lot of things you'll see this associated with is substance abuse, when toxicity of the body goes beyond the medulla's ability to handle it. So this figure shows on side A the cells of that form the walls of the capillaries in the body outside the brain, and the gaps, if you see in the picture here, that permit free passage of substance into and out of the blood. Opposite of that, on side B of this picture, the cells that form, they don't have those gaps. They're very tightly jointed, and thus inhibiting any kind of toxin or substance flowing into or out of the blood. So that's essentially it. Those are the cells of the central nervous system. Next, we're going to go into communication within the neuron, which is going to talk about the flow of the neurotransmitters and how the inner workings happen there. So check out the next video.